Alright guys, so today I'm going to step away from the floor plan and introduce you to a new integration I've made, which has taken up a bit of time and reason I haven't done much YouTube videos. So the integration is called Home Assistant Switch Manager, which you can find on GitHub at Sean Lee as a Home Assistant Switch Manager. This is a integration that helps managing your remotes or switches. So I found it very annoying in either Home Assistant or even Node-RED in trying to manage your switches. And I want to come up with something that felt more friendly and more like a user interface that you'd find on a mobile application. In Home Assistant, it was all done through automations, and you have to handle the incoming events through there or the MQTT data. In Node, I didn't go that route before making this integration. I was using Node-RED, and I had nodes everywhere. Just, it looked like a WAM farm in the end. So I thought, all right, it's time to develop something that makes it feel more interactive, a lot more less cluttered, and not, making new sensors or entities as such. So to install this, you can either do it through hacks or manually. And I do manually. I don't use hacks, so I can't actually give you a rundown on how to install it from there. But if you're already using hacks, I'm sure you're familiar with how to install things from hacks. So to install, just go to the releases, choose the latest release, and download the source code. Save that somewhere, and open up the zip and go into your Home Assistant directory. So in your Home Assistant directory, you want to put into your custom components folder. If you haven't got a custom components folder, then you'll need to make one. So we'll go in there, go into the zip and go into custom components within the zip and copy it over. This will also copy all the blueprints and any additional files that's needed to handle the integration. Just wait for that to complete. Then once that is done, go into your settings on Home Assistant, go into Devices and Services, and go to Add Integration, and find Switch Manager. Actually, before you do that, you would need to restart just for Home Assistant to detect it. So make sure you restart Home Assistant first, then go to Add Integration, type in Switch Manager, and you'll find it here. And once that's in place, you'll find a icon to your left as Switch Manager. You can see it better like that. Then you can go in there and start adding your switches. So I've already got switches already defined and created, but I'll start from a fresh new one. So we'll click on Add Switch, and we'll do, you choose a service that you use for your switch. So if you're using it through decons, use decons, or Zigbee to MQTT, or just a generic Philips Hue integration. I'll do a test on the Zigbee to MQTT, and I'll do a Philips Hue dimmer for that one. Name your switch something, I'll call it test. Now the identifier is the important part, and that's what's going to bind it to the device itself. Now Zigbee to MQTT uses MQTT, obviously, and this identifier requires a topic. Now the topic is generally Zigbee to MQTT. This plus here is a wildcard for anything between / and action. So if we click on Auto Discover and press a button on that switch, it will autofill and find that switch. If you have changed your Zigbee to MQTT's default topic, you'll want to change it to reflect that. Auto discovery will not work if you have changed the default settings. You can also use the MQTT tool within Home Assistant and try to hunt for your topic. And you can do this by listening to a topic, use the pound, and do start listening, and this will make a lot of data come in. But once you press a button, do stop listening, and you can see here down press release, and it should be down press somewhere, not in there, down press. And we're just worried about the topic here, and you can copy that. Oh, I don't need to, it's the same anyway. And then we click on set. Once we've done that, we click save. And once we've saved, we can actually see it reflected on the user interface. So if I press the brightness up button, you see brightness up. If I click on there and I can see, press it again, you'll see knit and press were highlighted. If I hold it down, you see it holds down, then if I release it, release. So it just gives you an indication that everything's working and also what buttons are calling what actions. So you select which button you want to create sequences for. Now the init is the initial press. Not all switches support init, but init means it's initiated, meaning that it's been pressed and it's always going to initiate regardless if it's press, hold, or hold released. So there you would define any variables you need to set or whatever you want, but generally you just want to worry about press. So if I go up to the top one, I'll do a press and I'll create a new action, call service, and I'll, no, let's do a light toggle. So light.toggle. And I'll choose an entity and I'll choose something that I can see from here. Let's choose kitchen main. And once we save that, I'll press the button and the light switches on. I'll show you from here just so you can see as well. Press it again now and it turns off. So that's all there is to just having something so simple set up and get going with your switches. You can do hold. Hold keeps repeating. So as long as you keep holding it, it'll keep running those sequences. So you might want a brightness up action. And release is the moment that the hold has been released. Again, all switches has different actions and different way they handle things. Up in the top here, you got your identifier, which also gives you a switch ID, which you can also find in the URL up the top. You can change your identifier here, do auto discovery again if you need to change that. Your rename if you need to rename it, and variables. So you can use these variables inside all your sequences in case you want something to reference that you keep reusing over and over. Or you can also use the service call switch manager. I'll bring it up here. Service call switch manager. Set switch variables. You give it a switch ID, which is 14 here, or you can use this special data variable, which is always passed in as switch. I'll put in a variable first and we'll do test -1. So in your sequences, you can actually change your variables dynamically. And I'll do data dot switch underscore ID. So you can either do it this way or just type it in manually. Depends whether you copy over your configuration or not a lot. You might want to use data.switch ID. So go back to the visual editor, make sure that's all fine. Click save. Now when I do hold and release for the top button, the on button, it will change that variable. Again, there's no variable in there yet, but I'll hold it down. Released. Now it's not going to show up until you do a refresh. And you can see test is there. And then you can also handle those variables within your actions as well. So if you have set a variable, you can do a condition Wrong one. Let's do a condition, and we just change that to template. Then we can just say data dot variables, because all the variables are inside the data dot variables object, and then it was test, and then we can do equals 1, and that will evaluate to true, considering the variable is set to 1 at the moment. Otherwise, if I did 2 or any other number, it won't validate. So that gives you, a little bit more freedom. None of this is integrated into Home Assistant as entities, so everything stays contained within its own switch, and so forth. I'll give you an example of one I've done, which is a bit more advanced, just to expand the possibilities of what you can do with this integration. I'm going to leave. I'm not going to save, but you can. Actually, before I do that, it'll be easy to show on here. If you want to see what data is coming in that you can use within these actions and sequences, click on debug. Once debug's enabled, you open your dev console. Depending on the browser, they're mostly the same. So once you get into the dev console in here, I'll press a button. I'll press the brightness button up, and you can see brightness button 1, event action triggered. Now this action, the data variable, you can use any of these within the action sequence when you're using templating. So you got data payload up press release, which is the payload that came in. The switch ID, which I showed you before, that you can use as your ID for setting the variables. The timestamp that action was taken, the topic, and the topic base name. Then you got your variables and tests. So you can find out what you can access just by looking at the debugging information. This is more just when it's incoming, just to have a little glance about when you're building your blueprints. Before I go on, if you want to build a blueprint, go to your Home Assistant directory, go into Blueprints. There will be a Switch Manager folder in there. Then you'll find all the blueprints that's already comes with Switch Manager, and you can just copy and paste or create a new one from scratch, and just name it something unique so it doesn't get overridden when you update the integration. I might do another video about blueprints specifically if that's requested by anyone. For now, I'm not going to get too deep into that at all. I'm not going to really touch on it. So once I'll show you what I was going to do, the dial tap, which is a bit more advanced. So once you're in here, just make sure I haven't missed anything. You can also disable so it doesn't run any actions on the switch itself. But in here, I've made it so I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Philips Hue tap dial, but I recently purchased one about a week ago, and I've been playing around with it. It's very fluent. I really like it, but I didn't like the integration that Philips Hue gave for it, and there was a bit of issue. So I've moved it over to Zigbee 10QTT, and I have now got the dial itself as the brightness, or it will either say if there's an action timer, it will go here, or it will either change the volume for my audio devices, or change the living room scene, or it will change the family room scene depending on which one activated the modifier, and I'll explain that. So if we go to this button that I've defined, then on a hold and release, I've done set switch variables. I'll show you the switch variables at the moment. Now I've got a bit going on here. Now these two here are the dynamic ones. They change based on the service call to set the variables. Now we've got dial action, living room scene, and the dial action time, which has all been set. So once it's been a hold and release, it's in the modified state. So I've set the switch variables to the current switch ID, And then I'll say the dial action is for the family room scene, and I give the dial action time the time now. This, if it's not in the modifier state and I just press it once, it will just turn on the family room, toggle the family room lights. This is also for the living room, and if I do hold and release, it does the same thing, but just for the living room scene, and assigns that to the dial action. And if I hold this one, it will set it to be in audio volume. So within that, we can go into the rotate tab. Now rotate, I'll show you now. If I rotate it once, you get different versions of the rotate. If I do it fast, it's fast, and slow, and so forth. Now, in the blueprint, I created a rotate that does either any of these. So I can just handle everything in the rotate action. So the first action is doing an if check. Now we check to see if the time, so we say if time now minus the time in variables data action time, which one of these when you held it down has set, and is above the action time, which is this one, 4 seconds. So I defined a variable of 4 seconds, which I can change, easily by saying 6 seconds instead, and it will reflect on both this side and the left side. Then if it's above that time, then we're just going to do the generic increase brightness. Otherwise, we're going to choose between the 3 actions. And we got, was it audio volume? Then we got data variables dial action, which was set dynamically, and we act on that. Otherwise, was it turn up the volume? Sorry, that's the action for that one. If it was a living room scene, then it will input select next scene living room, which I've defined through Node-RED. And just a quick glance of this, I've done actually I'll go to this one. I do dynamic groups from Node-RED, so when I add new scenes, it will automatically be placed into the input select, and it just matches the name of the scene, and just saves me, save the headaches of manually adding those scenes into a input select. So having done that, you turn the dial and it'll cycle through the scene, so it goes from start to finish and back to the start again, and you keep scrolling through. And the same goes with the family room scene. Then, as the last action, it's not a part of these conditions. I can scroll that back up. So then we do reset action time. Now we want to reset the action time because you don't want to be in the middle of scrolling or turning the dial, then the 4 seconds has passed and it stops doing the action. So it resets the time just so that you've always got 4 seconds after you've stopped turning the dial till it goes back and defaults back to brightness. So I just thought I'd quickly show you the Philips Hue tab because that's a bit more advanced. As I also got in the variables brightness, you got dial, rotate, right step, right slow, right fast, and so on. Now, you probably think it would make sense just to have it all as without having the left and right because they've got the same values, but I decided to do it that way because it's just easier for me to go to the brightness, increase brightness, and go to data variables brightness and use the payload, and it just automatically applies that value. Otherwise, I would have to do a bit of conversion on the payload to remove either right or left. I just, couldn't be bothered doing that. It's just easier to copy and paste the same values. And the same goes with this one. If we go down, you just want to make sure that you do minus in front of it so it's decreasing instead of incrementing. Then you change the light, which lights to affect. I've also made this a PyScript smooth brightness, which also means that it only affects the lights that are turned on. If all lights are off, then it'll turn it on. It's just do a quick PyScript lights. Set it with Notepad, it's easier. So smooth brightness, and it just does a bit of logic just to make it feel a bit more natural. The other issue I had, and you might find this with your dials or even sometimes brightness controller. It's just it will go to a brightness level, then it will go back down. It's because the brightness hasn't been set to that value yet, so you're getting a value prior to the value that it should be at in regards to your light. So I had to create a variable called brightness target, which when the service is called, it will assign that target value instead of referencing the current brightness of the light. So you got a more smoother, natural incrementing of the brightness or decrement. Then, yes, if you guys want to have this, I can post it into the resources folder. I mean, I'm not going to do it now unless it's requested, and just means that you have to install PyScript as well. But that is the real, basis of the integration I've made. And if you guys want me to do a video of the blueprints, then I can do one on showing how to make one of them. In the meantime, thank you guys and enjoy.